So over this 20 years journey, I'm sure you have seen a lot of things, right? In the beginning, you also said that the messy things of operations, administrations, and now in this era of DevOps, maybe you can clarify first for the audience and listeners here, what is actually DevOps?
So the first thing I'm going to describe is what it's not. It is not a role. It is not a job title. That's a major pet peeve of mine. I think it might even be a little detrimental in my hiring efforts because people are searching for that DevOps role. DevOps is a style of working. It's about creating a collaborative environment between the development team and the operations team and aligning goals and incentives between those two teams. You know, we say dev and ops and focus on those teams, but it really can be any grouping of teams. It could be dev and finance, ops and security. And we keep coming up with all these acronyms, DevSecOps, Fin. It's just like, let's just call it DevOps. We understand what the idea is. I always say you would never post a position for an agile engineer. That sounds insane. You would never do that because agile is a style of working. Same thing with DevOps. How do we build cohesive joint incentives for teams to work towards a common goal? And putting that sort of front and center shape a lot of your underlying decisions moving forward. Because when you think about it, so many of the problems that we encounter in life, not just even in technology, is a misalignment of goals.
You said that it's not a role, right? But I agree, from this part of the world, I keep seeing also DevOps engineer role. What do you think should be the name of the title? Is it like SRE, as some people actually chose to prefer?
I think that many system engineers, system administrators, whatever we want to call it, I think there are enough people that have been in these roles previously that are doing the same things that we're doing today. It's just with a different tool set, right? When we made the switch from Unix to Linux, we didn't really have to come up with a new job description. It was the same deal. It was just, now there's a new tool. When we make the switch from Python to Go, we don't come up with a new job title. It's just an asterisk under the software developer title. I think DevOps is the same. I think we have plenty of titles that could be used. I'm not naive to market forces, though, and I know that if you have a DevOps title, it's probably an extra $10,000 or $15,000 a year. So I don't begrudge anyone using that. In fact, I tell my team that I manage, if you want to call yourself a DevOps engineer on LinkedIn, that's fine. I'll back you. But that's not what we're called here. Because the minute you give someone a title like that, it becomes their job. The minute you have a QA team, guess whose job quality is, right? Language is a very finicky thing because it does so much to the way we perceive the world just by giving something a name or title. That's why I try to avoid it, so that everyone knows it's like this DevOps things we're talking about is everybody's job. And we need to think about that too from an ops perspective, right? Because we can quickly fall into a trap where we're like, oh, we're building operations stuff. Nobody else needs to see this. Well, that kind of runs counter to this collaborative environment that we're talking about. So maybe we do need to make sure that anyone and everyone can see that. Maybe we need to make sure we're keeping the bodies out of the ops code so that we don't have to lock down the repo. Some configuration file that they're like, we can't share that with anyone because there's too much dirt in there. There's just way too many dead bodies. We've got to keep that under tight lock. By putting that mindset forward, hopefully that helps to prevent and eliminate those sorts of traps.
Thanks for giving that clarification. So in your view, I think you mentioned this in the book as well, there are a few things that are very important when you want to adopt this DevOps culture, right? This new style of working. So it's an acronym called CAMS, or some people actually call it CALMS, CAMS or CALMS. So maybe you can give us a light here. What is CAMS?
So CAMS is really this light framework around DevOps as a concept to think about the core components that you need in order to make this transformation. The C is for culture. The A is for automation. The L that you alluded to that some people call it is lean. Metrics and sharing are the last two. So culture is like, one, so much of DevOps is cultural. And you need to build a cultural environment in your organization where these sort of practices and concepts are embraced, where people are free to experiment without fear of retribution if they get something wrong. There are all these small, insidious things that happen in our culture that, especially us as engineers and technologists, might gloss over, not realizing what an outsized impact that they have. Have you ever worked for a company where the culture is, if you don't use your budget by the end of the year, you lose it and you won't get it next year? That's a cultural thing. It doesn't have to be that way. There is no golden finance rule. That's just the way people operate. So what does that do? That creates a culture where everyone is spending aimlessly. they're spending aimlessly at the end of the year to make sure that they use that budget. And I'm sure the people in finance are like, sweet, that's exactly what we wanted to happen. But you created that culture through a small rule change. So culture is just something that we always have to keep front and center when we're talking about DevOps. Automation is really the thing that powers this. One of the things is you're always going to be asked to do more with less. But the other thing that we need to do is the more automation that you have, the more empowerment you can give to other people in the organization. It's this thing that in the book, I talk about this idea of exporting expertise. So it is a technical dance to fail over a database. I don't know if you've ever had to fail over a production database, but like everyone's been in that company where it's, oh, we got to fail the database over, get Bob. Bob's the only one that can fail the database over. The minute Bob turns that into a script where someone just has to execute fail underscore database, Bob has transferred a large chunk of his expertise into this automation script. And now he's empowered tens of people that can do this thing. So automation is key. I'll talk about lean briefly, but I'm not a huge fan of adding the L. Lean is just about operating dynamically and quickly. I don't know that it falls in the category of DevOps because typically you're adopting a model that is similar to the organization. So like if you're forced to adopt lean, but you're in a waterfall shop, that can be problematic. Metrics. DevOps should be rooted in data. As part of that empowerment, people need to know if the thing that they're doing is actually having an impact. And we always talk about it with systems and computers and whatnot, but it really extends everywhere, right? As we're running our ticket queue, is it actually performing the way we want to perform? And what metrics are we judging that success or failure by? We should be able to objectively point to success or failure, and we do that through metrics. And then sharing, how do we, again, back to that expertise exporting, how do we share knowledge? How do we share access when appropriate? How do we share responsibility? How do we make sure that we're all sort of on the hook for the same thing and we're all contributing to make that thing better? Another thing that's sort of front and center. So these things sort of collapse together to build this framework and how we should think about approaching these DevOps transformations. And when you look at organizations that aren't doing well in their transformation, you can usually find behaviors or actions that tie to one of these 5 categories. I keep leaving out lean. I'm sorry for all the lean fans. I'm not hating, but I'm hating a little bit.
So thanks for sharing. I really like the concept exporting the experts. So these things about automation, sharing your knowledge, I think it's a great thing, especially in this DevOps culture.